Welcome everybody to a special edition of UFO Man Live. My name is Tim, or UFO Man, and to my side is my co-host, my partner, Tommy Highway. Tommy?
Hey folks, I'm Tommy Highway. I want to thank everybody for coming out as always, folks. We have a wonderful show for you this evening. We actually have a very special guest to share with you tonight. His name is Michael SCHRATT, and he is an aerospace drafter. He's an author, a researcher, and a military aerospace historian. He's got a presentation he's going to share with us tonight, folks, that will blow your mind. And you're actually going to hear about some sightings that you've never heard about before. So, Michael, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have you with us this evening.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to join all of you. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Great.
Welcome. Okay, Michael, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. This all started, I don't know, I'd say when I was 6 years old. My dad used to take me to a place called Victory Air Museum just outside Chicago. And what they had there were a number of these World War II aircraft just kind of sitting out in the field there. They had cracked windshields, opaque skins. They had the serial numbers were chipped off. It had chip paint. There were cracks in it. It had weeds growing up through the wheel wells. It just had this ghostly appeal to me. And that's where my interest in aviation really got going. Being close to Oshkosh, Wisconsin, it was only a 2.5-hour drive. Went to there for about 27 years in a row. And that's kind of where all this came together. And then I guess you could say the UFO thing kind of blended in with that. And that's really how it all started.
Cool. Tommy? You're muted.
Yeah, thank you. That's outstanding. Very good. And I understand that you have a presentation that you're going to share with us this evening.
Yep, we're going to get into some crash retrieval cases. We'll get in some auto binder cases. We'll get into some prehistory cases. So hopefully there'll be some things that people haven't seen before.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Okay, well, when you're ready, Michael, you can take it away.
All right, so I will share my screen here. Let's see here. If I go here. Okay. All right, share and slides. Let's see. Share screen. Okay, entire screen. Let's.
Well, it comes up on the side, so when you...
So are you guys seeing that?
We will. Yes.
Can you see that full screen?
Yes, you need to go to that one button that says hide to the right and stop sharing. Thank you.
How about there?
Perfect.
Okay, we're good?
Yeah, we're good.
All right. Okay, so why don't we begin here? This is kind of a expanded version of my Dark Files book. It's now being edited and it'll be available, I'd say, very soon in a soft cover coffee table format. This is a pictorial history of lost, forgotten, and obscure UFO encounters. And I'm just going to give you the references of where I got this information so you can verify this on your own. The cases that we'll be talking about tonight, they all have paperwork to back it up. So this isn't something that I just pulled off the internet and called it my own. This actually took boots on the ground, the kind of research that we just don't see anymore, like going into university archives, pulling the microfilm, interviewing the eyewitnesses, going to QFOS and looking through all the cases, pulling out the actual manila folders, old school from the file cabinets. That's the kind of research that it's important to do, that type of boots on the ground research. Okay, so announcements. The visual aids used in this presentation are computer-generated forensic composite illustrations, which originated from actual UFO case files and eyewitness reports. So here's where I got this material. QFOS, which was at 2457 West Peterson Avenue. It's now part of the David Marler collection near Albuquerque. NICAP files, APRO files, MUFON, which has now been sent back to Ohio. 2 books I want to recommend. If there's anyone on the fence within ufology, like a family member or a friend, they're not just, they're kind of on the fence. They don't know if this is real, if it's not real. I would just recommend 2 books very briefly here. Invisible Residents by Ivan T. Sanderson. That goes into the USO cases, which is the unidentified submerged object cases. And then Uninvited Guest by Richard Hall. If anyone reads these two books with an open mind, you cannot walk away thinking there's nothing to this. Okay, so David Marler, UFO Research Collection, UFO News Clipping Service, Wendell Stevens Archives. We'll definitely be looking at some Leonard Stringfield collection cases, Gray Barker UFO Collection, that's in Clarksburg, West Virginia, and then just boots on the ground research. And then here, I'm going to provide you with all the references and source material so that you can verify these UFO cases on your own. That's the goal here, to have repeatability. So we're going to go ahead and start here. February 3rd, 1983, Mobile, Alabama. This came from APRO files. And the story here, backline story here is, a particular eyewitness was coming home from a dinner engagement. It was about 9 p.m. at night. She's driving down the road, and she hears this loud, piercing, booming noise. Her car starts shaking. She pulls off to the side of the road. She gets out of the vehicle. She looks under the vehicle, thinking that something was wrong with the transmission. That seemed to be okay. She drove another half mile down the road, and then off to the right, she saw kind of a clearing, and it was all lit up. And she sees this large 210-foot long craft. It was about 80 feet tall, and you can see the illustration here. Now, we're going to start on the top here. What you see here on the very top of this craft was a clear, transparent window section that wrapped around the 1/3 forward portion of the craft. Now, behind those glass pane windows, she said it looked like there were these 5'10" humanoid-looking beings that had slightly larger heads. They had no hair. They looked human-looking, but they weren't. It was kind of an antiseptically sterile environment. They were wearing these one-piece, tight-fitting white flight suits. Below that, there was another clear, transparent section. Below that, there were these multi-sized circular portholes. Now, this whole thing had portholes all around it, and it had rivets fastening this thing together. Now, she also said that it was low enough for her to look through one porthole through the craft and then all the way through to the porthole on the other side. And when she did that, she said she could see what looked like crossbeam and girder construction, like a truss bridge or something you would see at a battleship yard on the East Coast with these bulkheads. That's what she said it looked like. Now, below these large porthole windows, she said she could see something that looked like a sandbox. It was 6 feet by 6 feet. It looked like a square. And then there was these, they looked like cylinders sticking out, maybe 4 feet in length. That could be guns, but she wasn't sure. But that's what she said it looked like. Now, she also mentioned that there was a door closing from right to left, and she was able to glimpse kind of like an asphalt road on the bottom of this, and then the left-hand wall, which I find very interesting. She said on the left-hand wall of this craft, there were these pipes and tubes and cylinders, and I've heard this same thing at least 15 different times now, different eyewitnesses in different locations describing the same understructure on these vehicles. A lot of these witnesses say that it looks like a quote-unquote Midas muffler shop. That's what this thing looks like on the left-hand wall. Now, below, at the bottom, there were another 2 gondolas that were pretty much totally glass transparent with the same 5'10", one-piece tight-fitting flight suit, humanoid-looking beings. And on the very bottom flat surface of this craft were these multiple 12-inch by 12-inch square, highly polished mirror reflective devices in the form of a cross. So this is February 3rd, 1983, Mobile, Alabama. Now I'm going to move forward here and give you an enlargement. And now you can see this left-hand wall really good. This door here was closing from right to left. She had about a 10-minute sighting, and then this thing slowly moved from her field of view. Really good case. Here's the actual APRO Bulletin, Volume 32, Number 2, 1984, so you can verify this on your own. This is the original sketch that came with the sighting report. So we're going to move on here. USS FDR, November 1958, Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Now, a couple things to keep in mind. This particular aircraft had a history of UFO sightings, and one hypothesis to indicate why this might be the case is that this was the first aircraft carrier to carry nuclear weapons on board. So that might be the reason why. Now, the backstory here is it's about 9 p.m. They're on a shakedown cruise. This came from Chester Grzinski, who was there the night this all went down. Now, he has since passed. I did speak to him. I have his files. So we have the paperwork to back it up. You know, just after 9 o'clock, and all of a sudden, there was commotion below decks. I'm talking about chaos, screaming, yelling. People were climbing up ladders. They were rushing to get up to the flight deck, which you see here with all these aircraft on the flight deck. They were desperate to get up to the flight deck. And when they got there, they could see this yellow light approaching them, but this was no yellow light. This was about a 200-foot long cigar-shaped craft that was hovering over the flight deck. And we'll go ahead and advance this here. This is his original sketch directly from Chester Grzinski. And it hovered about, I'd say 150 feet above the flight deck. And there were 25 naval personnel on the flight deck looking up at this thing. So it's a multi-witness case. And what's interesting is they could feel the heat radiating off this craft onto their faces. So right there, it's a CE2 case. It's a close encounter of the second kind. Now, what's interesting is it was close enough for the naval personnel to look through these rectangular windows in this craft, and they could see what looked like beings going back and forth. Now, I'm not making this up. This is from Chester Grzinski. Here is his original enlargement, and you can see here up close, one of these beings pressed his face up against the window and then raised his hand over his head like he was waving down to the personnel below. This is his original sketch. So what we went ahead and did is we read the report. I did speak to the primary eyewitness. I took into account all of the things within his sketches and then commissioned my friend Tom Bogan to do a full color rendering. And this is a final rendering of what we came up with here. And you can see these naval personnel. And you can see this being looking back and waving down to the personnel back on the flight deck. And we'll do an enlargement here. And now you can see really good. So again, this is, you could call it a close encounter of the first kind, the second kind because it had physical effects, and then finally of the third kind because there were beings involved. So it's a CE2 and a CE3 case. Highly regarded and highly documented from naval personnel. Moving on, May 26, 1979, Calusa, California. Now, the story on this one, and there's newspaper clippings to back this up as well. It was around 11:30 p.m. at night. The gentleman you see here was watching television. All of a sudden, the television went out, and concurrently, the air conditioning went out. So he went back to the back part of the house. He looked at the circuit breaker, thinking something might have gone off. That seemed to be okay. The next thing he could feel is that the hair on his hand, the hair on his chest, and the hair on his head not only stood up straight, but started crackling. I mean, literally crackling. He looked up and he sees this 140-foot diameter dish-shaped craft hovering above him. It had these 6 conduit pipes that had frayed edges at the bottom. At the very top, if you look closely here, it had this dome section, but it was a ribbed dome. It looked like a lemon squeezer or an orange juice squeezer. It had these ribs on it. That's what this thing looked like. Now, on either side of this craft, there were prongs. There were 2 prongs. And so that's kind of the main craft itself. Now, off to the left of this craft, he saw another one of these dish-shaped craft. It was half the size of the original one. And what it was doing is it was pulling power off the 500,000 volt power lines, causing them to become cherry red. So this is a CE2 case now because it had physical effects. Now, what happened next is these conduit pipes retracted into the bottom of the craft, and concurrently these prongs retracted 90% of them into the craft. And when that happened, there was a hatch that opened up on either side, and these strange gooseneck lights popped out. Crazy, you can't make this up. So what he did next is he went back inside the house, and we've got that here. Here's the sketch of what the craft looked like. This is from the Sun-Herald, Calusa, California, May 29th, 1979. You can see these conduit pipes with the frayed edges. You can see this really clearly now, this strange lemon juice or dome section on the top. So he goes inside. He wakes up his wife. He wakes up his 2 kids. They pull down the blinds here, and they see the large craft flanked on either side with the 2 smaller craft now, and they're pulling power off the 500,000 volt power lines. They're becoming cherry red. And then in the report, it says that the large craft went from a dead standstill and then shot away like a spark on a grinding wheel, hovered over these low rolling hills in the background that were about 24 nautical miles away, and then came back again. And it did this in 2 seconds flat, and there were no sonic booms whatsoever. So someone or something had the technology to do this with no sonic boom. This is a long time ago. Be great if we had something like that now. We'll move on now. At this point, he was frightened for the safety of his family, so they all piled into the pickup truck. It said that in the report they were going 90 miles an hour down the road, and the large craft started following them. And it went over the top of the cab, over to his wife on the passenger side, then back over to the driver's side. They end up going to the neighbor's house. And here's the newspaper clipping here, San Antonio Express, February 6, 1977. So you can verify this. Family tells of terror as UFO chased car at 90 miles an hour, from the San Antonio Express. So they finally pull up to the neighbor's house. They come to a screeching halt. They get out of the vehicle, start pounding on the neighbor's door. The 2 neighbors come out. So now you've got the 4 eyewitnesses plus the 2 neighbors. They see the large craft kind of rapidly going at a 45-degree angle. So you've got 6 witnesses who verified this, and there was a blackout in the entire town of Calusa on that particular night when this is going on. So it's a very good CE2 case, a very good CE2 case. Moving on now, this, ladies and gentlemen, is my favorite Project Blue Book case. This is not my case. This is the United States government Project Blue Book. So it's in their own files that you can get at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. March 23rd, 1966, the primary eyewitness was an electrical engineer by the name of Eddie Lexon, and it's about 5:03 in the morning, so the sun is just beginning to peak up now. He's driving down the road, and all of a sudden, now he worked at Sheppard Air Force Base, and he's driving down the road, and he sees something blocking the road. I mean, so he comes to a stop, he gets out of his car, and he sees what can only be described as a bowling pin that's kind of like fallen over. Some people describe it as a perch or a bowling pin that has fallen over. It's about 75 feet in length. It's about 8 feet tall. If you start in the beginning here at the forward part over to the right, it had what looked like a B-26 bubble transparent canopy out in front. It had 2 high-intensity beaming lights that were facing forward, and then 2 that were facing vertically down. The whole thing was propped up on these lunar landing gear pads. Now, if we keep moving further back in the craft, there was a air stair door cutout with a man. Okay, there was a man. He was shining a flashlight near the bottom of the craft. He was wearing a 2-piece military green fatigue outfit. He had a baseball cap with the bill turned up. Above him was a stinger or a spire that swept back to about a 12-inch diameter ball with a red light on it. And then aft of the air stair door, there was about a 3.5-foot diameter porthole that was divided into 4 equal pie segments. Just aft of that, and this is very important, there were black letters written vertically starting on the top. It was TL4768 written on the side of the craft. Now, at the very end of this craft, there were these small flight controls that were way too small to be aerodynamically effective. So those could be something completely different. Now, at this point, whatever this man was, he basically noticed that he was being watched by Eddie Lexon. So what he did is he climbed up these air stair doors, he slammed the thing shut, and then, and I've got the original report on this, there was a high-pitched drilling noise. This same thing I've heard at least 10 separate cases now, where there's this high-pitched drilling noise, kind of a frequency that goes up, and then this thing hovered off the ground about 20 feet and then took off like a spark on a grinding wheel and made no sonic boom. This is back in 1966. And a few minutes later, as he was driving down the road, he saw a truck driver who was outside his truck. He was standing on the running boards, and Eddie Laxton stopped to ask if he needed help, and he said he was being chased by something that looked like this. So we've got two witnesses who verify this. This is Eddie Laxton's original drawing. You can see, I mean, it's kind of rough here. If you look at the top dimension, it's 75 feet across, and then it's 8 feet in width. He's got the lights in here. He's got the pogo landing gear. He's got the air stair door. He's got the 4 equal pi segments, and then very faintly here, he's got the TL4768. So what I noticed immediately is that if you look at the dimensions, over to the right, it says 8 feet, and then on the top, it says 75 feet. So if the right dimension is 8 feet, then this length dimension is way off. This craft would be much longer than it's shown here. So this is the final cleaned up version here. And I also should mention, whatever this man was with the 2-piece military green fatigue outfit he was wearing, he had these ranking bars on his shoulder, something you would see like on a military uniform. Those were seen by Eddie Laxton. Now we're going to move on here. Here is the actual Blue Book's index card, and you can see here, observer spotted object parked on highway in front of his car. Observer stopped car and got out to investigate. But as he got close to the object, a man apparently entered the object, and immediately the object began to rise from the ground. And you can read the 16-page report from the United States government talking about this incredible case. Just incredible case. Here's the newspaper clipping. Daily Oklahoman, March 1st, 1971. And what you see to the right here is an actual photograph of Eddie Laxton. And then below that, a really nice sketch of what the craft looked like. And you can see here, headline, object sighting now rude. So in this article, it talks about how he got harassed for talking about this. His phone never stopped ringing. It was annoying, and he regretted even mentioning this. So that actually adds credibility to his case. In this article, I thought it was important that we mention this. Now, this is Eddie Laxton here. Quote, what I saw was definitely not from space. The man was wearing fatigues and had a cap with the bill broken up like Air Force mechanics wear, Laxton said. It had common English letters on it. So even according to this electrical engineer who worked at Shepherd Air Force Base, he believed that this is something that we built. So I think it was interesting to mention that. And then I want to put down here, we should all consider very carefully the tremendous implications about what that statement really means. Yeah, we should reflect on that. We should reflect on the liquid rockets, the solid rockets that are still being used today. Here we've got a guy here. This is back in 1966. He believes he saw something that we made that didn't have any liquid rockets, who didn't have any solid rockets. And it's just important to highlight that fact. Okay, now let's move on here. 1897 mystery airship wave. Now this is interesting because it actually started in 1896 and beginning in Oakland, California, Sacramento, California, concurrently San Francisco, California. We're talking about thousands of witnesses from the West Coast to the East Coast, basically starting in 1896 timeframe, but it's always been mentioned as the 1897 mystery airship wave. We're talking about thousands of eyewitnesses that saw this gondola craft that had a very interesting wing on both sides. There were witnesses that said that they saw a rudder in the back. We've got reports of anchors that were being lowered. We have reports of big black dogs on the deck of these ships. We have reports of these eccentric inventor types with black top hats on the deck of these craft. And what they were doing is literally terrifying these towns. They were shining these high intensity beaming spotlights on the towns below. And it was like chaos. There were covered wagons that were flipping over. There were horses that were bolting from one side of the road to the other. And it was like total chaos. No one could figure out what these things were. As I mentioned, there were anchors that came down from these things. Now, it's interesting that pretty much 99% of these cases were at night, but there were some cases where there were landings, and then the townspeople got up to these craft and they saw the quote-unquote pilots, and they said that the pilots were wearing smoke-colored glasses. So I just want to present that. Does that sound like an alien spacecraft? So you've got laughter coming from these things. You've got anchors being lowered. You've got men wearing top hats. You've got big black dogs on the deck of these craft. Does this sound like an alien spacecraft? 1897 mystery airship highlights. We'll just go over a couple things here. The wave actually began November 18th, 1896 in Sacramento. The object cast down brilliant beams of light on the city before it moved toward San Francisco. Eyewitnesses described the craft as being 150 feet in length with 4 rotor-like arms. In some cases, anchors attached to ropes were dropped from the mysterious craft, and laughter could be heard originating from the interior. By May 1897, virtually all the sightings ended. Here's a couple of the newspaper clippings here. Record Union, Sacramento, November 23rd, 1896. It says a genuine aerial ship. Strange visitors seen there on Saturday evening. Yesterday's San Francisco Call has the following account of the airship having been seen over Oakland on Saturday evening. So they confirm it's being seen. Here's an enlargement of what this craft may look like, and you can see the man with the top hat here. Again, these beaming spotlights. Where did they get the power source for this? In some cases, these things were going 60 miles an hour against the wind back in 1897. Another enlargement showing you the wings of this craft. All right, now we'll move on to the 1964 Socorro, New Mexico. This is April 24th. Most people here are familiar with this case. We're talking about Lonnie Zamora. And the linchpin to this case, ladies and gentlemen, is the eyewitness himself. The credibility of Lonnie Zamora was really never challenged. And so that's what really locked this case down. It was the credibility of the primary eyewitness. So before this even began, this is April 24th, 1964. There was a family that was going on vacation. So they're driving their car through Socorro, and something that looked like what you see in this illustration, this somewhat medium-shaped egg, slightly off-white color egg-shaped craft comes beaming over their car, flies about 2 feet above the top of their vehicle, and then shoots away. And they saw this thing because it was so close. They saw this thing right over their vehicle. They pulled into the police department. They filed a report. And in the report that I believe you can get even to this day, it says in the report, quote, "You people really fly your planes low around here." It's actually in the report. So this happened even before Lonnie Zamora got involved in this. He was chasing a speeder literally minutes after the family saw this craft. And he saw off to the corner of his eye this white-colored egg-shaped craft fly near a dynamite shack on the other side of this rolling hill. So he gave up chasing the speeder. He goes down this kind of a rocky, unpaved road over some hills, and he gets within 300 feet of this craft. And now the Blue Book report said it was further away, but there's some really good eyewitness report indicating that it was closer than that, because there were people who interviewed Lonnie on like very soon after this took place. He got closer. And what he ends up seeing is this egg-shaped craft. It has this extended pogo landing gear. It had a nozzle at the bottom of it. There was an insignia on the top of this craft. And then there were these 2 small-statured humanoid-looking beings that were wearing these white coveralls. Now, when they saw that they were being viewed by Lonnie Zamora, they quickly got up into this craft. And then there was a banging noise, which I always thought was interesting. Seconds later, there's a second banging noise. And then there was a blue-colored flame that came out of the bottom of this craft. And then this craft hovered and then disappeared at a slow rate of speed. This is all back on April 24th, 1964. So here's the newspaper clipping, the New Mexico, April 27th, 1964. They talk about the Lonnie Zamora encounter. Now, if you look here, ladies and gentlemen, you'll see the original insignia that we've all been led to believe 50 some odd years now. And if you take that insignia and you rotate it counterclockwise 90 degrees to the left, you end up with this that you see on the left-hand side. Now, if you transpose this TPA-shaped figure and You cross that with the small bar, and then you move out the other vertical bar, you end up with something that looks like that. Now, if you transpose and reverse those letters, you get this on the bottom left here. And I'll leave it to your discretion to decide what you think that means. Okay, so this is what we've all been led to believe, but I'm here to announce, and this has been confirmed by new information, that this is the incorrect, repeat, incorrect symbol that we've all been led to believe from Lonnie Zamora all these years. The correct symbol is an inverted V with 3 hash marks. That is the correct symbol. Now, how do we know this? How do we know this? Well, there's been a new book published by Ben Moss called Not of This World, the 1964 Socorro UFO, the Humanoids, Witness, Police, Lonnie Zamora, that goes into detail on this, and they pin down what the actual insignia was. So I posed the question to the author, why have we been led this story all these years about the particular symbol that we've all are very familiar with? Why didn't we see the correct symbol from the very beginning? Here's the answer that I got back from the author. So here's my question. Why did Lonnie Zamora sign off on a fake symbol? Quote, symbol? Yeah, go ahead.
Excuse me for just a moment. We're actually picking up some kind of a noise. It sort of sounds like papers tearing or something like that. I'm not sure what that is exactly.
No, I don't have any papers here, but
I wonder what's strange.
Not sure what that is.
Okay.
The symbol was changed by U.S. Air Force Major Holder for the simple reason that providing a fake symbol, if any other cases came up and a witness reported the fake umbrella symbol, then they would know that the witness was lying. By Lonnie signing the fake symbol, maybe drawn by Holder, Lonnie was signing a contract with the government to keep his mouth shut on the symbol. It was country, God, then family in those days. Email from Ben Moss, November 22nd, 2020. So that's why we've seen this incorrect symbol. They used that to verify any other sightings that came up. That was the logic behind that. So what you see here is the overhead map of White Sands Missile Range. And if you look at the upper left-hand corner there on this Route 25, you can see Socorro. Now, if you go down to the bottom right, you'll see the scale in miles. And it's very clear that the westernmost corner of the perimeter border of White Sands Missile Range is within 5 miles of where all this took place. And I don't think that's by accident. I don't think that's a coincidence. It's literally within 5 miles of White Sands Missile Range border here. Okay, a couple of quick things on the Socorro sighting. Number 1, object was seen with very close proximity to White Sands Missile Range. Number 2, object featured retractable landing gear. Number 3, object UFO featured inverted barn landing gear pads with 90-degree straight corners. A mysterious metallic slam noise was heard just prior to liftoff and departure. So I asked the question, is that a door hatch closing? A second mysterious metallic slam was also heard just prior to departure, and I posed the question, is that a latching mechanism closing? 6, a very loud roar was heard prior to liftoff. It changed from low to high frequency, and then a blue-colored flame was seen coming from the bottom of the craft. So when you put this all together, we should really ask the question, is this Lonnie Zamora craft an alien spacecraft? It had a nozzle at the bottom of it. It had blue-colored flames coming out of the bottom of it. There was a metallic slam when they shut the door. It's screaming man-made technology. Now, here's one thing that I think really adds to this case. If you look at these landing pads, they look very man-made looking. They've got straight corners, they got 90-degree corners, sharp edges. So what I ended up doing is I looked at the mail impression that was made into this soil here, and you can see the outline of what that looks like. So we'll blow it up here, and you can see this is the impression that this pad made into the ground. So I ended up doing a solid model of that landing pad, and then I did a 3D drawing, which you see here. And if you look closely, you'll see that this thing has 90-degree corners. It's got sharp corners. It's got this 60-degree angle here at the bottom, another 90-degree corner. And I just posed the question, does this really look like an alien landing pad? This looks like something that's made at a machine shop on a CNC device or a milling machine, with all these flat shaped corners that are 90 degrees parallel to each other. Very rarely in nature will you see these 90-degree corners and flat surfaces like that. If you look at pine cones, if you look at oak leaves, if you look at tree waves, waves on the ocean, they've all got these curvatures to them. You generally don't see these 90-degree corners. All right, we'll move on to Falcon Lake, Canada. This is March 16th, 1967. Very famous case within ufology. Primary eyewitness was a man named Stephen Mekulik, and he was a rock hound. He was a mineral gem collector. And on this particular day, he was wearing heavy pants. He had a plaid shirt on. He was wearing leather gloves. He had a welder's goggles on to protect his eyes in case of chips came up. And what he noticed is there were some geese that were making a commotion near his location. He looked up and he saw two of these craft, not just one, two of them. One of them remained hovering. The other one landed about 200 feet from his location and sat there for 30 minutes. And I don't think a lot of people understand that he was looking at this thing for 30 minutes before he even got close to it. So he ended up getting enough strength to go close to it. And you can see him here. He's walking up now. And he notices that there is a hatch on one side. And then about 10 degrees from the vertical axis, there's another hatch, which measured 6 inches by 8 inches. This looked like some kind of a vent or exhaust hatch. The hatch he was looking in was about 3 feet by 2 feet. And there was like purple colored violet light coming out of this hatch. And he could hear what looked like or sounded like laughter and a language that he couldn't decipher. So he used English, he used Russian, French, Spanish. He got no response, just this laughter. We'll do an enlargement of him looking in now. And then what happened is this craft hovered off the ground about 12 inches, rotated, and that smaller hatch ended up lining up perfectly with his chest. And there was some type of hot exhaust that came out of this craft. And that smaller hatch had these very interesting, you could call them 1/8 diameter pinprick holes that were perfectly pitched in space. And the spacing on the exhaust hatch lined up perfectly with the burn marks on his chest. So it's a CE2 case because it had physical effects. And till the day he died recently, he had this concurrently ongoing, repeating medical condition associated with this particular case that he was involved in. Here, it actually caught his shirt on fire. So it's definitely a CE2 case. Here's a couple of different illustrations that show you what it might look like when he was actually looking inside this craft. And then here you can see the burn marks that were on his chest. And there was some debris discovered here. And then I want to take it even further than that. Here is a actual photograph. This came from Antonio Huneeus, and this is official Falcon Lake landing site photo from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And you can see, if you look closely here, you can see the round circular outline where the craft sat down, and it changed the soil from the inside of the circle to the outside of the circle. So again, another good CE2 case. Here is Edmonton Journal, May 24th, 1967. Foul smell persists. UFO sighter suffers chest burn. So there's multiple newspaper clippings to add more credibility to this particular case. Father Gill sighting, June 26, 1959, Papua New Guinea. So over 2 consecutive nights. Now, this was actually June 26, 1959, but it happened on 2 separate nights that were linked together. So it was kind of one sighting that took place over 2 nights. There were at least 25 eyewitnesses, the locals from around the area. What they ended up seeing was about a 35-foot diameter dish-shaped craft, which looked like a 2-tiered wedding case. So the bottom part of the craft was 35 feet in diameter. The upper deck of the craft was about 20 feet in diameter. And Father Gill could see what he termed 4 human men on the top deck of this craft. There were 2 that were forward on their upper rim, and then the other 2 were back near the center of their craft, and they appeared to be setting up or working on some kind of instruments. That's something that we've heard many times before. So these 2 men that were near the center of their craft were a little bit more obscured. So what he ended up doing is he wanted to establish some type of contact with these beings. So he waved to them, and they actually waved back. And he had a torch, or kind of like a lantern, and he was waving this lantern, and the craft responded to this movement that he was using with the lantern. So it's definitely a CE2 case. It's a CE3 case as well. They actually waved back, and here you can see this thing had a kind of a light blue white spotlight that was off at a 45-degree angle back in 1959 here. It's a very famous case. Now, I spoke to Paul Hynek, who is the son of Jalen Hynek, and sometime around 1974, at their house in Evanston, Father Gill paid them a visit. So you can see the scene here. They're having dinner. It's Father Gill. Jalen Hynek is sitting right next to him. And then Paul Hynek, Jalen Hynek's son, is sitting right next to Father Gill on the other side. And he described this case in great detail to Paul and Jalen Hynek. And when I heard the description from Paul that he heard from Father Gill, I said, yep, that's a real case, because he wasn't seeking fame or fortune. He was just, very conservatively discussing the case in detail. Really good case. A couple other illustrations here. International UFO Journal, November 1977. They had an article about it. Now we'll move on. This was a case that I pulled out of the QFOS archives that used to be 2457 West Peterson Avenue near downtown Chicago. Was buried there for like 40 years, finally pulled it out, and I felt, yep, we need to look at this case in greater detail. So it's Venezuela, December 26, 1972. There were 3 eyewitnesses, the father, the mother, and the small daughter. They're on the 14th floor of their apartment complex, and they see what they thought was a commercial airliner approaching their location. But this thing had an orange glow to it that looked like an engine nacelle was on fire. It started getting closer and closer, and by the time that it got within, I would say, about 500 feet from their apartment complex, this was no airliner. This was about a 50-foot long, you could call it elliptical-shaped craft. It had 2 half-hemispherical domes that were opposing each other, with this continuous spark gap mechanism going between them. It had this blue arcing light. And then on the side 1/3 and all throughout the back of the craft, it had these dual cast iron exhaust ports that had these lasagna noodle flames coming out of them. So we'll go ahead and enlarge this here. Here's the drawing I came up with from the actual eyewitness sketch. You can see these hemispherical domes on the bottom left here. And on the lower center, you can see these cast iron exhaust ports. And then off to the right, on the lower right, you can see these electrical, you could call them lasagna noodle flames. Now, he said that these did not look like campfire flames. It looked more like an electrical discharge. Here's the hemispherical domes with this spark gap mechanism going between them. It had this blue continuous spark. And then this is the lasagna noodle flames that were kind of violet in color. Now, as this thing flew by, he told his daughter to run next door and get a pair of binoculars. So she ran back in time for the husband to look at this thing through these binoculars, and he got a very good detailed look at this. I've got his original sketches of what the craft looked like. It flied by them at a very low rate of speed. It made a 45-degree bank up angle to avoid some other apartment complexes, continued on its flight path, and then about 5 minutes later, a second craft identical to this one flew right by them as well. So they had 2 sightings on the same night. This is the November 17th, 1986, JAL Flight 1628 case. This is a very famous case. It was reported all around the world. Paris to Tokyo over Alaska. So you've got the pilot here who is reporting these, and this is the part that gets a little misleading because everyone always talks about the second part of the sighting, but they miss the first part of it. The first part of the sighting were basically these 150-foot diameter coffee cans that look like Campbell's soup cans cut down 50% with amber colored lights on either side, and was dividing by this black electrical tape. That's what these two things look like. So picture these 150-foot diameter Campbell's soup cans that are cut down to 50% with a black electrical tape running through the center of the craft. That's what he originally saw. The pilot and the co-pilot felt heat coming off these things through the cockpit window onto their faces. So it's a CE2 right there. Now they called local ATC and they asked us to do a 360-degree turn to see if they could lose these things. And that these craft, whatever they were locked off the wing, and they followed the 747 throughout the entire 360-degree turn. Now, the second part of this, and here's the actual newspaper clipping, Miami Herald, Sunday, January 4th, 1987. FAA reviewing data from night Japanese pilots report UFOs. Next thing that happened is off to the left and to the rear of the 747, and here's his original sketch looking outside the cockpit window. You can see this electrical tape going down through the center of the craft. Out from the left of the cockpit window comes this absolutely gigantic acorn-looking craft that was minimum twice the size of an aircraft carrier, comes chasing after the 747. Here's Captain Kenji Teruyuchi, who was the pilot. He described this to the media. He actually lost his job over this sighting, but then he regained his job later. And this is what this acorn craft looked like as it was approaching the left rear of the 747. So this is JL 1628, 1986 sighting. Next one, June 22nd, 1976, Canary Island. This is a famous case because we've got some very good paperwork backing up this, and we have that from something called the best available evidence. That's the original point of this. And it's unidentified flying object briefing document, the best available evidence, and this is December 1995. Now, the person who was involved in this was the Rockefeller Foundation. They're the ones who foot the bill for all this, and that was handed over to no one less than President Bill Clinton. And Hillary Clinton has it as well. So we have it confirmed that Bill Clinton knows about this case and Hillary Clinton knows about this too, from Lawrence Rockefeller. He's the one who foot the bill on this. And we know absolutely for a certainty that the president knows about this. So here's the table of contents here. And if you look down here, you can look at all these interesting cases. You've got the Iranian case. Here's the multiple witness case in the Canary Islands, 1976. That's the one we want to talk about right now. The first part of this case was seen from the deck of the Spanish naval ship, the Atrevida. This is 3 miles north, nautical miles off the coast of Fuerteventura, which is the Canary Islands. What they ended up seeing at night was this glowing orb. So it wasn't very interesting in the beginning, just this glowing orb. But as it gets further into this case, now what happened next is whatever this glowing ball was, it moved 85 miles in 3 minutes, which is equal to 1,900 miles an hour. It made no sonic boom, and it ended up parking itself over the Gran Canary Island. Now what happened next is very interesting. Whatever this glowing orb was, it turned itself into this glass transparent bubble. Okay, this is by Michael Swords. And inside this bubble was a platform, and there were 3 consoles on the platform. And then there was these 8 to 12 foot tall humanoid looking beings that were wearing these flight suits, and they were operating levers. I'm not making this up. This is from Lawrence Rockefeller's report. They were operating these levers, and then there was a clear transparent tube that ran from the top part of this platform up to the bottom section of the top of this clear transparent dome, or you could call it a sphere. And there was blue colored smoke coming up out of this tube. And we'll do an illustration here. This is the final rendering, what we came up with. There were 11 witnesses that saw this, It was about a 25-foot diameter glass transparent bubble, and you can see these beings inside operating these levers. So the doctor saw it. He was in the taxi cab. His patient saw it. The taxi cab driver, he saw it as well. And then there were multiple other eyewitnesses in the town that saw it as well. What happened next is this craft expanded to a very large circle, and then there was a bright flash and it disappeared. A very well-known case within this document that was seen by both Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton saw the report as well. Now, here we'll talk about the 2001 Chicago O'Hare case. This is not to be confused with the 2006 Chicago O'Hare case. Now, I spoke to the original eyewitness on this. There were at least 4 other individuals that were there in close proximity to this, so it's a multiple eyewitness case. Chicago O'Hare, April, May 2001. So what you're looking at here is an illustration of what the craft looked like kind of from the side. It was actually a sphere, more of a circular saucer-shaped craft, not a cigar-shaped craft. So it's kind of misleading here because we're looking at a side view. What he ends up describing to me is this saucer-shaped craft. It had about 12 elongated, you could call them slot windows with light coming out. He said there was a clear transparent canopy on the left side. There was a little circular open. This is early in the morning. It had rained the night before. On the bottom of the craft, he said he could see what looked like octopus tentacles that were moving back and forth. They looked alive to him. At the end of these tentacles were these balls or spheres that are about 12 to 18 inches in diameter. They were moving at the end of these tentacles. And then there was a prong or protrusion at the very back end of this craft. So now we've got like 5 separate prongs or protrusions associated with these vehicles. Here's his original sketch of what the craft looked like. And then I interviewed him a second time about 2.5, 3 years ago. And this is the final drawing that we came up with. And you can see these octopus tentacles that were moving like they were alive. Now, what's interesting is, as this craft was flying by what they call the Ozark maintenance hangar, that's where they saw this. And it was very early in the morning. The tarmac was wet. This craft flies by the Ozark maintenance hangar. And then he says, as it flew by, it made a 45-degree angle, tip up, continued on its way. And then about 20 seconds later, there was this low frequency humming noise or a rumble noise. And it was actually a 747 on takeoff roll. And it took off literally 20 seconds after whatever this craft was passed an active runway. So if it was 20 seconds earlier, we could have had a mid-air collision and hundreds of people could have potentially died. And so this is back in April, May 2001, Chicago O'Hare Airport. Dana Point, California, December 1976. Pulled this case from QFOS archives. It was buried there for years. I don't think it was ever published, but you've got the primary eyewitness and her 2 children, her daughter and her son. They're all driving down the road and they see what looks like a quote unquote fat Frisbee. That's not my words. That's their words in the report. A fat Frisbee. It's very large in size. It's right outside their windshield, flying right by there, looking directly out their windshield. They could see this thing. And it had a red blinking light on top. It had literally thousands of the multicolored computer processing lights wrapped around the outer circumference of the craft. So you can just imagine what this thing looked like. Here's the actual clipping of what the drawing looked like as it was parked right in front of their windshield. And they're shocked to see this. They can't believe it. Now, what happened next is really interesting. We've done a rendering here. This is my AutoCAD drawing of what the craft looked like. There's a blinking light on top and all these multicolored computer processing lights. This craft, as it flew by, and this is the exact correct make and model. I don't know what color vehicle they were driving, but that is the exact make and model of the vehicle they were driving. As this thing flew by and near the end of this sighting, what this craft did is it tipped up 90 degrees and it rolled away like a wagon wheel, according to the eyewitness report. It rolled away like a wagon wheel. So we don't hear too much about that, but it's not completely unknown where these UFOs, these saucers, they tip up at 90 degrees and then they fly away. So that was the case here on this particular sighting. November 20th, 1959. This was a Wendell Stevens collection case. So the primary eyewitness is, she's basically putting up the laundry on the laundry line, and she sees this 25-foot, really can't call it diameter, but more of a 25-foot wide circular shaped craft that had these vanity lights that were rotating on the bottom of it, multicolored vanity lights about 25 feet across, hovered over her location, nearly hit the top of her house, and then moved over to the left. And we'll do an enlargement here. You can see what these, now what she called these is, they look like Tesla coils, but they were sockets. And we'll do an enlargement here. You can see these sockets here. They all had a different colored light at the end of the socket. And what they were made of, if you look here, you see the bulb at the bottom, and then it had what looked like Dunkin' Donuts stacked up on each other. So there were 3 donuts, and then between these donuts, there were these black colored bands. Now, she said that on the very bottom of these donuts, she could say what looked like ancient Aztec writing, or something that you would see on a Peruvian rug border or Inca pottery. That's what she said looked like, these strange designs that were on the bottom of these donuts. Here is her original sketch, and she did a really good job of kind of representing what these donuts look like with this very strange pattern on here. Now, I went ahead and did an enlargement and rendering here. You can see the sockets with the multicolors, and on the upper left, I've done an enlargement where you can see the black bands. Off to the right, you can see this very strange insignia here. I've got it here. Resembled an ancient Arabic language, also looked like the border of Persian Oriental rug reference designs seen on Mayan or Incan pottery. That's what she described here. This is back in 1956. She died about 4 years ago, so we were never able to actually talk to her, but very well known sighting within the Wendell Stevens collection. Next one, January 1st, 1970, Finland. 2 skiers are going down the ski slope. They see a cloud kind of following them, and it actually parks itself over a clearing. And so this is just a cloud at this point. So they ski up to this cloud, and all of a sudden there's this bright flashing light, and they see this 10-foot diameter dish-shaped craft. It has a dome on top. It has 3 inverted domes on the bottom. And then there's this kind of purplish light that comes down, and I can't describe this anymore. Something that looks like a garden gnome shows up. Now, again, I'm not making this up. This is a garden gnome. He was about 3.5 to 4 feet tall. He was wearing a cone-shaped head or hat on the top of his head. He had a green, tight-fitting flight suit. He was wearing green boots. He had kind of an old nose on his face. And then the report said that he was wearing some type of a camera device, and he was moving the camera from one guy to the other, like he was taking photos. Here is the actual sketch that came with the report. The source on this is the Gray Barker UFO Collection, Clarksburg, West Virginia. So you can read the report there. I'm not making this up. This is a very interesting case. It's well documented. There were CE2 effects as this craft flew away, where the skier got sick. He had to be helped about a mile back to the lodge. So very well known documented case. July 9th, 1995, Grovos Mills, Missouri. There were approximately 4 eyewitnesses that saw what looked like, hard to describe this particular saucer, a double wedding cake with kind of removed section in the center. And the witnesses said that there were multicolored flashing lights around both upper and lower decks of the craft. But then they said that there were these streams of white light coming down from the bottom of the craft, and there were white colored circular orbs going up and down inside these tubes of light back in 1995. Concurrently, while all this is going on, at least 2 of the eyewitnesses saw a smaller triangular shaped craft in the background while all this is going on. So back in 1995, Grovos Mills, Missouri. That was confirmed here in the Actian Advisor issue number 3. They describe this case in great detail here. March 21st, 1950, Stuttgart, Arkansas, 95-foot diameter dish-shaped craft. This was seen around 9:30 p.m. at night through the cockpit window of a DC-3. So the pilot saw it, the co-pilot saw it. They got a good look at this thing. And what I thought was interesting is they said that they could see at least 8 to 10, you could see circular openings on the bottom of the craft. And what they said, what was I think was very interesting here. Here's the drawing that I came up with the craft. This is 9:29 p.m., 15 miles north of Stuttgart, Arkansas. And I've included their 2 quotes here, and I've got the sources for these as well. Here's what the pilot said here. This is not me, this is the pilot here. We firmly believe that the flying saucer we saw over Arkansas Monday night was a secret experimental type aircraft, not a visitor from outer space. Captain Jack Adams and First Officer G.W. Anderson. Then they went on to say, I believe it was some kind of experimental type aircraft that's been kept a secret by the Air Force. It was definitely some kind of aircraft in controlled flight moving at tremendous speed, Captain Jack Adams. So here we've got the pilot, the co-pilot. They're saying it's one of ours. Here's the actual newspaper clipping. Saucer experimental aircraft, not spaceship, air pilots say. Asheville Citizen, March 22nd, 1950. So if they're right, which, we certainly don't want to doubt them, but if they're right, somebody made a breakthrough in 1950. Somebody did back in 1950, long before, we've got really good commercial jet transport. They're already flying these things here. And I've got the quotes here from the Asheville Citizen, March 22nd, and also the Arkansas Times, 1950. So just backing up where this came from. Now, no discussion about UFOs would be complete unless we talk about the Michelin Man cases. I want to point out that they've been seen all around the world. It's not a hoax. It's not a fabrication. It's been verified all around the world, multiple sightings. You can't talk about this subject without talking about the Michelin Man. So it's July 31st, 1968, Reunion Island. It's within the Indian Ocean. And the primary eyewitness is picking grass for his rabbits. And he turns a corner and he sees this absolutely bizarre craft. It's 16 feet across. It has a transparent section in the front. It looks like an egg-shaped craft. It has a blue transparent or translucent section on the right and left-hand side of the craft. There's a pedestal that looks like a glass opaque pedestal on the bottom of it, propping up the egg-shaped craft. And then there's a mirror image of what's on the bottom directly on top as well. He gets a little bit closer to this, and he could see these Michelin men. They were wearing this kind of like a tight-fitting flight suit, but it had the rib sections. It looked like the Michelin Man. There was a bright flash of light, and then whatever this thing was, it disappeared completely. Now, when investigators got to the site about a week and a half later, they did find residual effects of radiation. So it's a CE2 case and it's a CE3 case. The Reunion Island Michelin Man case is a very famous case. Here's some of the original drawing that came from Flying Saucer Review, January, February 1969 issue. So you can read about this case in great detail within that article section. Now, second case I got from Clarksburg, West Virginia, the Gray Barker collection, was March 14th, 1976. The primary eyewitnesses were the father and mother of the son that went to a graduating naval class ceremony. So they're returning home from the ceremony. They're driving down the road, and it's the wife that saw something off to the left first. It wasn't the husband who was driving. It was the wife that saw it first. What she saw and described was this white light, but then she said that there was a spiral that came out of the ground, and the spiral transformed itself into something that looked like Sunday Night at the Oscars. Another one of these black-colored rubber diving suits that look like the Michelin Man. So this is a second one of these cases. He was about 8 feet tall. He was not walking. He was hovering off the pavement about 12 inches. He had his fists clenched and they were outstretched down. So he had his arms stretched down. She definitely described that the fists were clenched and his arms were down. As they passed by this thing, the electrical lighting system on their vehicle burns out. So it's a CE2 and it's a CE3. They go about 650 feet past this particular craft. They pull off to the side of the road. They pull down, they wave down two cars that are going in the same direction. They didn't see what they saw. For some reason, they didn't see it. And what they ended up doing is they drove behind one of the other two cars, and then the other car was directly behind them so that they had some lighting. It didn't burn out the lighting system on the other two cars, just their car. Now, I want to give you the quote, the exact quote from the driver of the vehicle of what he said it affected him and what he described here. Here's the original sketch that went with the report. You can see here the map of where this took place. Gray Barker UFO collection. That's where I got this particular case. Now, let me take you to the witness here. Don Vincente Correll. Quote, "It was not of this world, but of another." That's what he thought it was. So if you link that up with the other Michelin Man case from Reunion Island, now you've got two very good eyewitness case reports. Here's the third one. So now I've got three. This is December 12th, 1977, France. They saw, this was actually a young girl who was finishing up dishes. She was looking out the kitchen window. She saw a red-colored egg-shaped craft. It had no seams. It had no visible means of propulsion. There was no propeller, no jet engine, just an egg-shaped craft that was red in color. And she said that this quote-unquote Michelin Man emerges from this craft. He's hovering above the egg-shaped craft. He goes off to the left, back to the center, re-emerges, and she saw all this at fairly close range, and she said it looked like he was wearing a diving suit that was ribbed, just like the Michelin Man. But then he had this rectangular or square-shaped helmet with a cutout window in the front of it. So this is the third case of this Michelin Man that's been pretty much been verified at this point. Now, we want to switch gears now, and we want to talk about UFO crash retrievals. And this really represents the ultimate holy grail of ufology. Now, why can we say that? Because this is what it's going to take for this particular subject matter to really get into the mainstream. Now, we've been hearing a lot of reports from Nimitz aircraft carrier. We're talking about naval reports, but it's really the crash retrieval reports that are going to push this field forward. It's going to take nothing less than physical evidence. I'm talking about body, I'm talking about craft, I'm talking about debris. If we don't have the physical evidence, we are just going to be spinning our wheels for the next 75 years in the field of ufology. We need to get the physical evidence to move this field forward. So let's talk about the first crash retrieval, right? Cape Girardeau, Missouri. It's April 20th, 1941. William Hoffman Mann, who is the preacher at the time, the minister, he gets a knock on the door. It's about 10 o'clock at night, and two police officers show up, and basically they ask if he could come to investigate what they thought was an aircraft crash. They didn't know at the time. So they originally thought it was an aircraft crash. He gets into the passenger side. They drive about 20 minutes to the other side of town. When they get there, they see the police there. The fireman was there. There were some farmhands on there, and he sees a 35-foot diameter dish-shaped craft. It had augured in at about a 40-degree angle. It had a hull breach on the side, showing you some of the interior components. He could see buttons and switches and dials and levers, kind of mechanical looking. There were some flaming embers in the background, but then he said there were three beings laying on the ground. And he got up close here. You can read about this report here. Here is William Hoffman. That's the Reverend. This is Charlotte Mann. She's the person who really instigated this particular case and sent her file a report to Leonard Stringfield. This is years ago. She filed a report. Now, Reverend William Hoffman Mann, he got up to one of these beings that were lying on the ground, and this particular being was still alive when he got there. He got to the survivor in time. He perished about 60 seconds later, but he did get to him in time, and this is what it looked like at the scene. We've done the best we can with the illustration. They were about 3.5 feet tall. They had enlarged heads and large eyes. They were wearing a one-piece tight-fitting blue flight suit. So here he is just about a minute before he passed away. Now, while all this is going on, these newspaper photographers were taking pictures of all this. And what they ended up doing is there were two farm hands that held up one of these beings that were already perished at this time, outstretched its arms, and then held up its body under its armpits, and they snapped a photograph of this. This is from Charlotte Man describing this thing. 2 weeks after this event, one of these photographers went to Reverend William Huffman, knocked on the door, and walked in and said, "Reverend, I think I've got something that I want to show you and I want to give you." He actually gave him the photograph that was taken. And that photograph was kind of handed down through the family. Charlotte Mann, who gave a lecture at MUFON at the International UFO Conference in Phoenix about 2.5 years ago, she was the witness that actually held this photograph. She saw this photograph and she described it in detail. Here's Charlotte Mann, and she describes what this photograph looked like. It had ribbed edges on the bottom of it. It was kind of an antique photograph, but this is the kind of evidence that we would need to actually move this case forward. Now, somewhere around 74 time frame, this photograph was lended to a neighbor who said he was a photographic expert and wanted to investigate it. At that point, the photo disappeared. So we took all the evidence that we could put together. We took her testimony from the Reverend, put it all together. We made a replica of what this photograph would look like. And here's what we came up with. So this may be fairly close to what the being looked like according to the eyewitness sketch, the eyewitness testimony, and then we've got the burning embers in the background and newspaper photographer. So something somewhat similar to what we see here. And then here's the question. Where would you hide 3 extraterrestrial bodies and a circular craft or debris of unknown origin back in 1941? Well, you'd think, well, we want to store it at a secure location, so let's store it at the Pentagon. But the problem is the Pentagon didn't exist back in 1941. So according to a very interesting book by Paul Blake Smith, the debris and bodies was actually stored at the lower underground vault at the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. So that's where it was in 41. So we went ahead and did a rendering of what it looked like in the bottom vault here. You can see the craft at the background. We've got some of the debris in the foreground, and then the 3 bodies were kept in these transparent tubes or cylinders. Who knows if they're still there? We don't know for sure, but it's believed in 1941 they were there at the time. So the Cape Girardeau craft. Now, is there any way to prove any of this? Is there any documented evidence? If you go on Majestic Documents by Ryan Wood, they've got a document here. This is a retyped memo from FDR to General George C. Marshall, dated February 27, 1942. I'm not going to read the whole report, but if you look here in the enlargement, and we'll just do the first part of this here. And now this is President FDR talking here. "I have considered the disposition of the material in possession of the Army that may be of great significance toward the development of a super weapon of war. I disagree with the argument that such information should be shared with our ally, the Soviet Union. Consultation with Dr. Bush and other scientists on the issue of finding practical uses for the atomic secrets learned from study of celestial objects precludes any further discussion, and I therefore authorize Dr. Bush to proceed with the project without further delay." Okay, so this is back in 1942 that this was written. If you break this down here, look at what it says. It talks about disposition of material in possession of the Army. So they're already talking about crash material debris right there. So if it's written in 42, then you've got the Cape Girardeau crash in 41. You've got the Battle of Los Angeles, 1942. So already they're talking about the probability of having at least 2 crash saucer dish-shaped craft in the possession of the Army by 1942. Then it talks about here about the development of a super weapon of war. So now it gives you the impression that they're attempting to reverse or back engineer the propulsion system of these craft to be exploited for a super weapon of war. Now, look at the wording here. It says atomic secrets learned from the study of celestial devices. I keep getting the impression, who uses this kind of wording anymore? Celestial devices? That can only be one thing. And atomic secrets learn from them? Within the first two sentences, you've already got the Rosetta Stone for a potential bombshell revelation that they recovered something. They were trying to make a weapon of war from the propulsion system, and they were studying it because these were something that came down. They were looking at the atomic secret. So it's really a bombshell document. So let's move on here. Let's go to July 2nd, 1947. Now, this is a very well done rendering of a map that I put together. This is done under the direction of Don Schmidt, who is with Tom Curry as the two primary researchers on the Roswell crash retrieval. So it's July 2nd, 1947. If you look 35 miles north of Roswell, you see this big impact site. Now, I don't want to start there because it actually happened prior to. So let's go over to the left here, and you'll see something called the touchdown site. That is the beginning part of the Roswell incident. It's actually 4 separate incidents. You've got the touchdown site where green fused glass was seen in conjunction with a black seamless box that was recovered. That's basically never talked about. Lewis Rickett, and we've also got the the meteorite expert Lincoln LaPaz identified both a green colored glass and a black colored seamless box that we don't even know to this day if it could be opened up. Now, about 5 miles south of the touchdown site is the debris field. That's where Mac Brazel and Timothy D. Proctor saw all this debris on the ground that they really couldn't explain, but you could crumple it up in your hand and it will come out. It floated down, it opened up like liquid mercury. Timothy D. Proctor was there as well, and you can see the trajectory of the flight was from the northwest to the southeast. Now, if we go here at the impact site, there were 5 bodies recovered and 1 was still alive. It was an egg-shaped craft the size of a Volkswagen, more egg-shaped than circular. Just west of the impact site is the second body site. That was 2.5 miles west of the impact site, and 2 bodies were recovered here for a grand total of 5 bodies, and 1 was still alive. This is 35 miles north of Roswell. So let me take you to the scene, and I want to sequentially walk you through the case here. So this is the Roswell crash impact site, July 2nd, 1947. This is what it would have looked like on the night of the crash. So if you look here, it's just these rolling hills. That's all this is. It's very featureless. So if you were flying over at the time, you would definitely see something out there. Here's the morning of 3rd of July, 1947. You've got Mac Brazel here, and then 7-year-old Timothy D. Proctor on horseback discovering the debris field for the very first time. So you've got all this debris scattered about here. There was a 10-foot wide gouge that measured 200 feet in length that was also identified as well. And this is this holy grail debris that we could all use now to push this field forward. Now let's move next to what happened here. Here is the crash retrieval operation, July 8th. So if the crash occurred on the night of July 2nd, 11:59 p.m., 1947, whatever crashed there was sitting out there on the night of the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th. The military didn't get involved until the 8th. So these bodies were sitting and decomposing out there for 5-6 days by that time. They were already decomposing. So here you've got the egg-shaped craft. You've got the bodies being recovered. You've got the survivor. There was definitely an 18-wheeler tractor trailer associated with the retrieval operation. There was a medical ambulance truck that was identified. There was a troop transport on the upper right, and then Don Schmidt said that there was a water tank and a windmill within about 300 feet of where the craft came down itself. So this is accurate per Don Schmidt. Now I want to take you to the next scene here. This is July 8th, 1947. So I should mention there was a crane that came from downtown Roswell that was called to hoist the craft onto the lowboy tractor trailer that we didn't have room to fit in this illustration, but there was a crane that did come from Roswell to aid in the retrieval operation. We'll move forward here. So this is July 8th, 1947. We have it plus or minus 1 minute. It was 4 p.m. There were multiple eyewitnesses that saw a U.S. military Army tractor trailer with a lowboy. They were pulling and heading in the direction of Hangar P3, Building 84 at Roswell Army Airfield. An egg-shaped craft with a tarp on top. It was completely concealed. 2 paper boys saw it, and multiple eyewitnesses in Roswell. They saw it as well, going down Main Street. It would have been great to see this. This was 4 p.m. Now, right around 4:15 p.m. is when they entered Hangar P3, Building 84 at Roswell Army Airfield. You can see the bodies laid on the floor here. There were 2 caskets. You can see off to the right the lowboy tractor trailer with the egg-shaped craft. They were building a crate near where the bodies were associated. At this time, there were multiple things converging at the same time. They already had the first body fly out. That's why you only see 4 here, because that was flown by Pappy Henderson in a C-54. So already they had bodies flying out. Again, you can see the crate here being built. Once they had the bodies in the caskets, they put the caskets in the crate, and that's the chain of events that actually took place. Now I want to take you to the next scene here. Here is the night of July 8th, 1947. This is at Roswell Army Airfield, Atomic Bomb Pit number 1, where what they ended up doing is they built a perimeter screen around the atomic bomb pit. They took whatever bodies were in the caskets, they put that into the wooden crate. They lowered the crate into the atomic bomb pit, and they put an MP, multiple MPs were positioned both inside and out both of these rings, and they were given orders to shoot to kill anyone who entered this ring at all. That's how highly guarded this particular bomb pit was. So next thing that happened on July 9th, this is the morning of July 9th, 1947, a B-29 called Straight Flush taxied over the atomic bomb pit, and then by way of this hydraulic lifting device, they hoisted and lifted the crate containing the bodies into the bomb bay of the B-29. This is July 9th, 1947. That took off. This is B-29 Straight Flush. And then we have the autopsy at the Earl Medical Lab at Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio. This is after July 9th, 1947. Now, gentlemen, are you still with me here? Are we still?
Yes, sir. We're still here. We're just enjoying your presentation.
Okay. Now, a couple of days ago when we spoke, I mentioned that I would have a world exclusive surprise for you. Okay, I hope you remember that. But anyway,
Yes.
There's a story been floating around here. Now, this has been talked about in Roswell, the Ultimate Case File Closed by Don Schmidt and Tom Carey. They also have this report in Witness to Roswell that was published years prior to their latest publication. This concerns a story by Marion Black Mac Magruder, World War II pilot. He looks like a Hollywood type, really good looking guy. He was called, this is back in 1948. This is May of 1948. He was with a graduating class of air cadets, and they were called to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base because the government wanted to get their quote-unquote opinion on something. Okay, they wanted their opinion on something. So you've got these air cadets that enter this room at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. They sit down. These 2 guys walk into this room, and they have these boxes with them. So the cadets are thinking, what's all this about? They didn't know what was going on. They proceed to open up these boxes, and inside the boxes, they were told that this is the debris from the Roswell craft. Now, they didn't know that there was a crash retrieval. These 2 men start handing out debris to the air cadets. So Mac Magruder, who was there, he held the Roswell debris in his own hands, as well as the other air cadets as well. So you can kind of get the sight picture here. Now, this isn't the real surprise. The real surprise came later. So they put the debris back into the boxes. These two men lead these air cadets down a corridor at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. They make a left-hand turn into a medium-sized windowless room. Okay, so you can picture about 12 of these guys, clean-shaven guys, good-looking guys, World War II pilots. They're in this room that has no windows, but there's a two-way mirror at the back wall or front wall of this facility where, gentlemen, they were shown the survivor, the actual survivor from the Roswell crash retrieval, because there was one survivor. He lived until May of 1948. And so what I want to do here as a world exclusive, I want to take you inside the room, and I'm going to give you the best, repeat, the best pencil sketch that has ever been shown in the world. This is per Don Schmidt, so it's been confirmed. This is what the body, the craft, the being looked like. He was alive, and I want to take you inside right now. This is what it looked like. Here is what it looked like when they were looking inside this one-way mirror. So we believe that this is the most accurate sketch of what the survivor looked like. This is May 1948, Roswell survivor, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So what this really boils down to is, can we trust these witnesses, right? Can we trust the word? Now, it's secondhand dead man's testimony now, right? Because they're long since passed. There's no 509th Bomb Group members living anymore. They're all gone. So in the eyes of the government, it's cover-up complete. But when you have a military pilot like Pappy Henderson, who flew the C-54 body flight, when we have him, we have his wife talking about what her husband told her, because he was the pilot that flew the body. When we have Mac Magruder, ace pilot from World War II, when he says he sees the survivor, do we take these stories, do we take these accounts, and do we dismiss them? Or do we take them as reliable eyewitnesses? And so that's what I want to present to you two gentlemen and everyone watching and listening this evening.
Outstanding. Wow. Well, how about that? It's very interesting. I actually grew up in the same area. Well, I grew up in the same neighborhood as Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And in the 70s, as a child in grade school, I would hear all about me. Even the teachers would talk about the alien bodies and the Roswell crash and the whole deal. So, yeah, Wright-Pat's always been a very big part of ufology.
So the teachers would tell you about the bodies that were there? The teachers told you that?
Oh, yeah, we talk about it all the time at length. Yeah. In fact, my mother tells a story that, I don't know if she was in high school or junior high, but one of her classmates, I guess his older brother was an Air Force officer at Wright-Pat during the Blue Book era, and actually brought a copy of Blue Book or some of the materials to school for show and tell. Highly classified and the whole deal. My mom swears that she saw this happen. And I guess the kid got in a bunch of trouble for it and the whole deal. But so it's really, so it's like a real big deal where I'm from.
Interesting. Okay. Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's like, do we trust the validity, the credibility of military pilots? Why would they lie about something as unusual as that? It just doesn't make any sense. And it's like witness after witness, military pilots talking about this.
Sure. Well, you also have Philip Corso. I mean, why would someone that has been trusted with nuclear codes and had just an illustrious perfect, spotless military career, why would he come out at the end stages of his life and make the claims that he actually, saw the bodies and the wreckage and the whole deal of Roswell? Right. I mean, it makes no sense that a man would risk his credibility for a book deal. I mean, he didn't make that much money on that book before he passed,
Right.
Tim, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. There are too many people coming out with their stories at the end of life because their NDA no longer seems to affect them. And they're telling what they actually saw. So, in my opinion, a deathbed account is more credible in some cases than others.
Well, you can't kill a person twice. So
Right, exactly.
unless if they don't have family that they're concerned about, let's say, then at that point, who was the gentleman that was interviewed in the hotel room? Very elderly gentleman. You know the one I'm talking about, by Nick Pope.
Boy, I don't know who that is.
Oh, you're talking the CIA guy.
Right, very elderly gentleman, and he was. Yeah, he was dying. He had some sort of a blood problem. And this guy was incredibly old. I don't remember his name. It was a very interesting interview. Nick Pope did it, and he tells the entire story. He was part of the not only Roswell situation, Roswell incident, but in everything that happened after that. And he started when he was a very young man, in his early 20s, to the end stages of his life. And it's such an incredible story. I really recommend that. One of these days we'll find that and we'll post a link for you folks.
Good.
Right.
Excellent.
So, let me ask you this, Michael.
Yeah.
In your experience, how can I put this? One of the things that ufology tends to attract are people that are a little bit off kilter. Let's be honest. And, we have to weed through that on the channel like you would not believe.
Sure.
You've got every crackpot and weirdo out there. When it comes to the people that you've actually reached out and touched and all of that, did you get a sense of great credibility, or did you ever run up to someone that you just knew was absolutely full of it and you could prove why, in other words?
Well, what I try to do is I try to gauge the credibility by other cases that I have on file too. So when you hear about one witness talking about a craft that had pipes and tubes and cylinders about it, and then another witness that had a different sighting and a different location and time frame, when they describe the same pipes and cylinders, then I know I've got a case. Then I know I've got something credible. Yep, that's how I gauge the reliability.
So you sort of corroborate one story to another,
Yes.
and that's okay. Well,
Correct.
That's a great way of doing it. That makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah, repetition. Yep. It's kind of like mass sightings. I had a mass sighting with 12 people. So we had 12 different opinions of the same objects. So it's like, the more people, the more repetition, the more credibility, the more provenance.
Exactly.
Well, we seem to have people that are witnessing some of the same designs of craft sort of over and over, the Tic Tac being one of them. And then we have, various other designs that are sort of one-offs. And I think Tim, many years ago when we first started the show, he mentioned this, and I think he just put it brilliantly. He's like, think about it like this. You've got Ford, you've got Chrysler, you've got Fiat, General Motors, and they all make something that basically does the same thing. It's a vehicle. However, it's a different make and model from a different manufacturer, and many of those vehicles even have different purposes. Like, a truck is different than a car. Maybe that's what's going on. Maybe they're something. Who knows? It's all speculation, of course, at this point. But I tell you put together one heck of a presentation there. I'm very impressed, and
Yes.
Especially thank you for that world exclusive. We really appreciate that. That was very, very interesting.
Yep.
Yes. Very interesting presentation. Completely blown away by some of your stories. Yes.
Well, I try to document the sources so that you can verify it on your own.
Right.
That's the goal.
And if anybody out there in the chat room or watching online wants to verify the sources, all you've got to do is go back and watch this live stream again and get the information from Michael SCHRATT, the man,
Sure.
the myth, the legend.